Are we, let me know if we're live or whatever.
You're totally live.
Totally live all this time?
All this time you've been live. I just had to go take a credit card.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. Thank you all for joining. Welcome. We are live at 4338 Route 9 Hyde Park. This is the Artist Gallery Collective of Hyde Park. It's 1:30 on Sunday. Thanks for showing up. I really appreciate the opportunity to show my stuff because as a commercial artist, illustrator, there's really not a venue for this type of work in a fine art gallery. So I really appreciate that, that they let me speak my stuff right here. I'll take any questions later on and stuff. Let me first do some housekeeping. We have a solo show. I'll be here all through August. I'll be here every Saturday and Sunday to show up and talk about my stuff. I'll be doing a talk on the 14th Saturday, a different topic, but related to cartoons and stuff. It's text versus images balancing. I'll also be here on the 21st, doing a talk about animation and how comics are made, how cartoons, the actual process. So that's it. And on the 28th, which is the next Saturday, I want to just show some cartoons because there's a lot of cartoons that are from World War II, which have a lot of historical reference, little sub-references in there. So I thought it might be fun to just show some cartoons. So that's my participation in August. On September 4th, we're having the local, studio views.
Art studio
views. Where all the studios, the private artists are opening up their homes and their studios for anybody to just drive around and tour. And we will be part of that. That's September 4th. So that's
September 4th and 5th. But on the 4th, we're going to have our outdoor art show.
Yeah, we're the only gallery in the area that has a yard. So on September 4th, we're going to have a drive-through art show where we'll have our art in the yard. People can drive through. It should be COVID safe. That's why we initiated it. So we'll have music and we always have wine. So we always have a good time and good event. So thank you again. What I wanted to talk about today was how we view art in general and also how I view art. When we go to a museum or an exhibit hall or some gallery, we walk up to the wall. It's usually quiet. It's usually a large room, well lit, very quiet. We go up to a framed rectangle on the wall and we look at it, and we see the context, the material, the medium, whatever, the coloring, and we evaluate. Maybe it evokes some kind of emotional response, and then we say whether we like it or not. And then we sidestep past the wall, and we go to the next framed picture, rectangle, and we look at the composition. And that's how we generally view fine art. Hey, Elliot. This chair. I can get more chairs if you need. So that's generally the way that we look at fine art. And I look at art differently because as an illustrator cartoonist, I was raised in the 60s, like we were talking about earlier. I was raised on newspaper comic strips and comic books and animation and cartoons, so I look at art very differently. My visual aids here. If you go to a fine art museum, I don't know if this helps, but you look at one framed image, whatever it is, it could be a photograph, and you just sidestep over and you see the next framed image, and there's no connection, there's no correlation. You could have the same artist, you could have the same time period, the same composition, the same medium, but there's no relationship. But if you go to sequential art, like comic books or newspaper comic strips, you have the one frame, and it immediately goes to the next one. It's like story, and so you have to keep kind of a different thinking, and sometimes even the space between is part of the whole story. One of my favorite examples of this is this cartoon from The Far Side. And this is you wouldn't call this a great piece of art. You wouldn't even call it a funny cartoon because there's nothing funny going on here. It's not funny. But it's a hilarious cartoon because the reader, observer, is forced to think of what's happening next. There's a time sequence here. So in terms of here, what you're seeing is this.
But you might need to explain what's in the picture for the people on the Zoom and the people in the back that might not see.
I can pass this around, but it's got a bomb there, and you've got two scientists, and one scientist has got a paper bag. You know, he's about to, so you pass that around. But the whole point is that what you're seeing is this part of you're seeing the first image. You're not seeing the second image, but the reader is involved. The observer has to create this in their mind. And that's something unique to comics and sequential art, because if you look at some of the paintings here, you're just looking at the one image. There's no connection. There's no time or space. So that's why a lot of my stuff, I like showing motion or action. I studied animation when I went to school. I studied animation. And when you do traditional animation, you have to draw every frame. And so I had the opportunity to draw some of my own characters and animate them. In the old traditional style, you have to draw every frame. And so when you draw a character, you have to draw the next pose, you have to draw the next pose. And so you're always thinking about motion and connection. Where's this character going? And you're always thinking, when you do an animation, you don't have to worry about the background. And so a lot of my stuff, I don't draw backgrounds because I don't like drawing backgrounds. I concentrate on the character. So when I think about art, I think this way. I think visually, I think motion. For example, if you had a giant picture of Napoleon Bonaparte on a white stallion, you know, reared up, and he's in his military regalia, you know, everyone would say that's a majestic pose. It says a lot about France. It's biographical, whatever. I'm thinking about the horse just reared up. It's going to come down. I'm thinking ahead, and that's how I view art differently. And it's either a handicap or an advantage for me, because there's so many times when, and that's why I have trouble with still life, because I see a still life. I can appreciate the technique, the masterwork, you know, the detail and stuff like that, but it's sitting there. And that's why a lot of my poses, a lot of my artwork is, I want to see motion, I want to see animation. One of my big influences in my artwork is Pogo, Walt Kelly Pogo. He went for about 25 years, newspaper, comic strip. He was an animator for Disney, so a lot of his characters show animation, and there's a good story. And so this was the strongest influence of my artistic style and also my thinking. So that's how I think about art. I just think differently. And I think that's part of being a commercial artist and an illustrator. This whole thing, it's kind of my rebellion. It's kind of like me thumbing my nose at the fine art, because, as I said, you've got all these rectangles you step, you know, from rectangle to rectangle. This is my way of saying, break that third wall. You read the description there. Because I think frames are very confining. I mean, a frame, if you look at a piece of artwork, the frame can enhance it. It could be a nice little mount matting or something like that. But I also think it constricts. It's also very confining. And so a lot of my artwork I don't like. I like it to move and go beyond the border. Some of the stuff, even in my comic strip, I don't use a frame. I just have a single line separate the panels. I like a lot of motion or openness. Let me give you an example of that. I did the logo for the Art League, which is our group that supports Poughkeepsie. Now, most graphic designers, when they have the name of their company or their business or something, they'll say, okay, here's the name of my business, I got the type, the letter there, let's put it in a box. To me, that's confining and restricting, that really, so I put the box in the center, and each of the words are connected. So the box it lets the words breathe, either coming or going to the box. So this is just my different attitude towards rectangles and frames. So it's kind of tough sometimes to look at art, and I'm thinking sequentially. I'm thinking what happened before this and what happened in the past. So that's my struggle or my benefit, I think, how I view art. So, anybody got any questions at all? I could talk a lot more about anything.
You said that Walt Kelly was one of your influences?
Oh yeah, big time.
What about any others? I noticed like you don't have any, a lot of people now, it's all about the superheroes.
Yeah. I collect comic books. I've got a personal collection of 7,000 comic books. I've been collecting since I was 12 years old. I stopped collecting it. It's just, the industry has changed. But I learned anatomy from comic books because it's all superheroes. They're usually wearing skin-tight costumes with their underwear on the outside. And so you learn how to draw the human body in action poses. So even when I draw human anatomy, I didn't do any of my realistic humans here, my figure drawing. But it's always in an action pose. It's always a gesture. I don't just have anybody static. I always have an expression. This picture here, I get to do that. This picture here, you know, this is one of my promotionals I did. But I always have that gesture, the hand, foreshadowing or the foreshortening. I always like to have motion and animation in my images. I will tell you this little story about commercial art. Is I was hired by to work in a marketing department for a manufacturer. It was great. They liked my creativity and all that stuff. But they made equipment for bakeries, delicatessens, grocery stores. Not very romantic, not very, not for my style. So one of the products they had was a cart that had kept fish fresh. So it had ice and stuff. So they said, Carl, can you draw it? Who would be an expert on fresh fish? A penguin. So they had me draw a cartoon penguin. So this is what I did. And, you know, so that's one of my pieces I really enjoyed. The thing about, no one's going to see this because it was in an industry magazine. And so the only people in the food market or the bakeries, whatever, would see that. And the real ad was a full-page ad. And that's the original size, basically, but it came out this big. So, you know, that's what the way it goes. But that same company, they made bread racks. And some of the bakeries have large walk-in ovens where you just push the cart full of dough in there and it comes out. And so I was thinking, how do you make a bread rack exciting? How do you make you know? So I thought, so I did this, which is one of my favorite pieces. And I don't think you could get a bread rack to be more exciting and animated than that. The trouble was that the guy in charge, I could pass these around if you want. The trouble was that the owner or the head of the marketing department was also the designer, and he was thinking technical. He was thinking blueprint, and he looked at this and he said, "Our bread racks don't bend."
He must be an engineer.
So, I mean, they don't dance in the spotlight either, but so he didn't use this. He turned it down, which so I've got a nice portfolio piece, which I'm proud of, but it was never published or printed. So it's come and go when you do commercial art. And that's one of the things about commercial art is you have to do what they tell you to do, but you get paid.
Yeah.
With fine art, you get to do what you love, but you might not get paid.
I love the attitude on your penguin with glasses.
Yeah, I think that I do a lot of characters which have that little kind of pose stage.
Yeah.
That's partly from Pogo, yeah.
You mentioned industrial art before and illustrations. I've seen some remarkable, interesting manual handbook illustrations. John Muir comes to mind.
Right.
Of the how-to books. Where would you put that in category?
John Muir, the naturalist?
No, and that's an interesting comparison. It was John Muir who wrote the How to Keep Your Volkswagen Alive books with fantastic illustrations outside of the frame. That's what I think of sometimes when I see your work. I'll have to show you.
Yeah. I've done some technical drawing where there was a man who repaired violin bows, and he needed a technical drawing of the bow.
Yeah.
the wood, you know, and so I did that for him, and that was published. But it's not something you'd show in a museum again.
Right, yeah.
So there's a little bit of opportunities. One thing about being a cartoonist is you'll never see it in a newspaper. There's no little punk ads for cartoonists. You have to sell yourself. Actually, one of my first gigs, I saw an ad for cartoonist, and it was a small publication up in Rhinebeck. A guy was publishing out of his house. This was decades ago, and so I was hired. I did some of his cartoons for him, and it paid. It was my really first gig, but that's got me started like that.
Carl, where did you go to school?
I went to school in Pittsburgh. I was drawing my whole life, and as I mentioned yesterday when we were talking, we had a reception for the high school award winner. And you know, I just drew every day, and I just loved it. Comic books, you know, inspired me. Animation, whatever I saw on TV, and I would just draw all the time. But when I got to high school, you were assigned something. You had to do what the teacher told you. You had to practice at first, and you had competition from the unspoken peers and your classmates. You got graded. And all those four things just took the wind out of my sails. And really, I lost interest in pursuing art because I just wanted to do what I love. And you know, I got over that, but there was a big gap before. But I went to a school in Pittsburgh. It was a trade school, and it was not a good school. They were teaching the old stuff. This is when computers were coming in. In fact, that's one reason why I got out of traditional animation, because nobody does traditional animation anymore. It's all computer generated. And Elliot might be able to talk a little bit about that, because nowadays, I mean, I still use pencil and paper. I draw my images on pencil. I'll get them, and then I'll put them in a computer. I'll scan them, and then I'll make them darker, and I can colorize them. Most of the stuff is in Photoshop. But when it comes to animation, now it's all computerized, and you draw on the screen, you color in the screen, you make it a screen, and I'm too much old-fashioned to conform that way. And the jobs are very competitive and very scarce. You got to live in Florida or California, so that kind of put the kibosh. I'd love to do traditional animation. What's that? Yeah, Disney, Warner Brothers, all those, the big industries, Pixar, it's all down in Florida. I mean, there are some studios. The last traditional animation movie was Who Framed Roger Rabbit, where they had to draw and paint every frame because it had to go in with the movie. So, that's technology.
Because I know some of that was digital, sometimes.
No, they filmed it all, and then they had to, one by one, they had to paint, because you have a celluloid, they put a piece of clear plastic, you know, celluloid over the, and you have to hand paint it. So that's how that movie is made. We had a whole bunch of artists just out there painting each frame by frame. That's how the original, like Snow White and Disney, you had to paint every frame. And you're talking 15 frames a second, you know, that's a lot of work, a lot of paint.
We have an original cell from one of the quick scopes.
Really?
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm trying to form this into a question that would be beneficial for everybody here, but I'm just going to say it as best as I can. But can you maybe riff on the unique space that, and you touched upon it a little bit, the unique space that sequential art has in the realm of just artistic dialogue, right? Like I can look at an abstract painting, I can look at a scenery, and immediately it's an emotional connection, I get it, or like it's up to the viewer's interpretation type of thing. But with sequential art in particular, it has the ability, like I think of like Calvin and Hobbes, and I think of like sort of the slapstick comedy of like Tom and Jerry, and how there's a innocence, there's a genuineness to it, and it like invokes struggling here, but just it allows for more people to just have like an honest dialogue about whatever the subject matter that you're displaying in comic. Like that's something that I'm drawn to.
Well, if you go up to a fine art painting or something, and you can interpret it, unless there's an obvious. Even sometimes, if it's realistic, there's might be some kind of interpretation to it. But when you see a comic strip, newspaper or a comic book, it's pretty straightforward. There's probably not a lot of symbolism. I don't know if you've gone to a comic book store lately, or if you're into the comic books, if you've seen any comic books. The art is tremendous. It's all computerized, digitized now. It's phenomenal what they do. We've got a whole new string of artists who are just amazing compared to how things were in the 50s, but that's technology. The story writing is terrible, but not as, but there are some really great literature in terms of comic books, graphic novels. That's one. It's not all just superheroes doing punches and funny animals with eyes in the face. There's some really good literature, good stories, good adventure stuff, and sci-fi. So I still love comic books as a medium. But I see comic books as an American thing also. It really was an American industry, and we're used to looking, open up the newspaper, and you know how to read left to right. You know it's a funny character, you get the joke. And I think that's truly an American thing. So we take it for granted of how we read. So
I remember the little booklet
a flip book. Yeah. Well, that's how traditional animation works. You know, frame by frame. You flip it however much, go forward, backward. That's how. I could have brought up, when I do one of my other talks, I'll bring in some of my animation and show you some of the drawings. But it's very tedious. You're just drawing. You have to draw the character like this, you draw the character like this, you draw the character like this. Now they do it all computer. In fact, it's cheating. I don't like it. It takes the romance out of it. Well, you have to design the characters. Someone has to do the original drawings. You still have to have, and they also have something called storyboards, where when they're figuring out how to make the animation, they have little pictures of what it's going to look like. Like a comic book. And so you know the character's going to be here, and it helps the animator. But there's still a lot of drawing in it, but when it comes to the actual final production, it's in a computer.
So they still have to animate though between the key frames, right? The key
Right.
frames would be manually created, and then
In fact, that's why a lot of animation looks stiff. When you're doing traditional animation, there's a concept called squash and stretch. I wish I could show you that, but the whole idea is to make, if you look at Bugs Bunny and some of the Disney stuff, the characters are very rubbery. They float and they exaggerate the emotions. Like if you're reaching into a pocket, if you're a cartoon character, you just don't go like this, you go. You know, that's how you reach it. You know, that's how a cartoon character reaches into his pocket. You exaggerate. And because it's, you know, that's hand drawn, you can do every frame. With computer animation, they take the arm and they move it like this, you know. And so it's choppy, and you know, they colorized or animated 3D a Charlie Brown movie. They did Rocky Bullwinkle. They did it 3D. It doesn't. It should be flat. It should be colored. I don't like the way. I never even went to see those movies. I don't like it when they take a newspaper comic strip and they computerize it to make it look round and friendly. That's my old-fashioned.
I think comic books, especially, and when I was growing up, one of the assignments I got from my father was go get 3 comic books because that was things he read. You know, and it was one of the things that made me the reader I am today. I think they get short shrift when it comes to the education.
Well, I learned to read through comic books.
Right.
My vocabulary and exposure to, and it's not just punches and evil villains. It's good literature.
I learned a lot of vocabulary growing up from reading comic books.
Yeah. A lot of cultural references.
I learned that.
Plus I could use, what do you call it, Classics Illustrated and not have to read the book.
Well, when I was a kid, I got a copy of The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame, that whole story. And I was reading it, and it had illustrations, and I was thinking, I know it's going to happen because the picture just showed me what's going to happen. So I really lost interest in reading it. So there's a delicate balance between how much words there is, how you. I'm going to be talking about that next week on Saturday, the balance between text and images, visual versus literal. So that'll be next Saturday. Any other questions? Zoom in, yeah, we can zoom it, you don't have to show up. I'll check with my assistant, which I thank Barbara Todd for helping here. Okay, all right. If they have Wi-Fi in Vermont, yeah. Okay. We'll send you pictures.
Are you still making Gunky Mouse?
Oh yeah, well I had to hold off on Duncan to do some of this stuff. In fact, I'm grateful because this show forced me to do some new work. A lot of this stuff is new, but yeah, my whole idea, I've got about 30 pages of Gunky Mouse. It's all black and white, and then I'm going to make a graphic novel, hopefully, and my goal will be to get that done at the end of the year. Yeah, Carl.
Remember we were discussing that cartoon, a while back?
Yeah.
We looked it up, you
Yeah.
found it and all that?
Right, it was that pilot or something like that, or
No, I don't think anybody would remember it, but Smiling Jack.
Smiling Jack, I did look it up.
Yeah.
There's I remember Steve Canyon and
Oh, yeah.
Terry and the Pirates, all those old
Terry
stuff.
and the Pirates.
I mean, some of that stuff was before my time, but I have gone back and looked at research. I just love that old stuff. Yeah.
I wasn't a big fan, but I always remembered in some of the newspapers on Sunday, you had that one picture of Prince Valiant.
Oh, yeah.
All one picture.
Yeah.
There was things all over that picture.
Well, Prince Valiant did use word balloons.
Yeah.
He always had a narrator.
Yeah.
But the art was, I think it's Hal Foster was the artist, and he did just wonderful, realistic. Well, that's the trouble. That's what I show in this. And that's what I demonstrate in this one. My also favorite works is how comics have changed over the years, because they started out as from newspapers used to publish the comic strips, and then they had the color ones on Sunday. And finally, the color comics became so popular that they made them separate. They sold them separately as comic books, and that's how comic books originated in America. It's an American invention. And then they were big. You had 4 panels, and you could fill up a whole page, and people looked at they went straight to the comic book, the funnies. And it was wonderful. And then back in about year 2000 or so, turn of the century, the newspapers, struggling financially, they said, let's cut the comics. So they made the comic space smaller. So now the artists had to draw smaller, which means you couldn't fit word balloons, you couldn't put in backgrounds. You had to have a 3-panel joke instead of a 4-panel joke, which actually changes the structure of the dialogue of the joke. If you tell someone a joke, it's now got to be 3 panels. So, and that's why newspapers, the comics now, the art's terrible, the humor's down, they're single panels. Some of the good ones, like Burt Breathitt, who did Bloom County, very elaborate, well drawn, he gave up newspaper comics. Calvin and Hobbes gave up newspaper comics because they was too confined and restricted. So this is really, it's very sad for me. That's one other reason why I gave up. I gave up animation, I gave up newspaper comics, so I've got to do my own thing. So. That's it. Thank you all for showing.
Hold on a second. Let's see if anybody on the Zoom has
Okay.
any questions.
Anybody wave or shout out?
Anybody? So we got waves from Faye and Ilga, and,
Cool.
and your bro is being very quiet right now because he's on mute. I don't know. Are you there, David? You're muted if you're there.
We did put this on Facebook to family members and also members of the artists.
Yeah, I am here.
Hey, bro,
How you doing?
was that your question?
Yes, that is my question.
I think that was his
I guess
That
question.
was the question, okay. Stumped me.
Yeah. What's the answer? How is the dead rubber chicken on your tie doing?
I can't do anything seriously. That's one of my other problems is that I just, when I look at the Da Vinci's, Last Supper, it's a masterpiece. It's a wonderful detail. And I look at it and I say, why are they all sitting on one side of the table? It's how a cartoonist kind of has to revert things. That's how you have to take a look at things.
The answer to that question,
Oh,
why they're all on one side? Because it's set up in a monastery, and that's the head table.
Sorry, David. Can you say that again?
The painting is set in a monastery's dining room, and that is the head table.
Oh, okay.
It's like a-
That's why everybody's on the one side.
So they had to sit still while the painter was. All right, take my joke away. Thanks, bro.
That's what you get for having the historian as a brother.
Yep. He says that's what you get from having a historian.
Yeah, my brother's a serious historian.
Yeah, he knows his stuff.
Lined up, bro.
Thank you all for attending. We do have refreshments in the kitchen. There's another room on the other side. You can walk around. There's some artwork upstairs. I'll still entertain questions and that, but I really appreciate you showing up. Thank you, Carl. I'll be here next Saturday. 6 days from now. I'll be here.
We won't.
Did you say Ilka had a question?
Did you have a question, Ilga?
No,
Okay.
no, I just waved hi.
Hi.
Thank you to the Zoom people.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Carl.
Thank you.
The language that just Bible. Your strongest influence. Okay, yeah. All right, Terry. Hey, Chris.
Hey.
Okay, yeah, don't worry, no pressure. Walking. Thanks, Terry. You fist bump for Elba.
Hey.
Andy, how you doing? What about your fist bump?
I got a mask on, so.
I can get masks with that. However,
Plus a cute tie.
thank you. It's for sale.
I don't think I've ever seen that. Did you do that?
No,
Okay.
this is my solo room for August. Once a month, we give one of our members the honor. Sure, yeah, sure.
Do you have a name? He's cute right there.
Yeah. Well, this is supposed to connect.
Oh, okay.
Everybody's looking for the groundhog in the hole.
Oh, it's a groundhog.
I do a lot of groundhog.
It's much cuter than our groundhogs you ever are.
Dog knows.
Yeah, that's the whole premise. I worked on this for 2 years.
Oh.
Every time, groundhog's coming up, I want to do a groundhog premise. And I finished up to here, and then I lost the file. So I had to start all over. So finally, this is like one of my better pieces. But I do a lot of stuff about groundhog things. American.
Yes.
You know, nobody else says woodchuck day.
Yeah.
Okay, any questions at all? Okay. The same gentleman who does that, he has these large pieces out here.
Very cool, bro. Now at least we know that somebody that we know that now.
That's fine, that's fine.
That's right.
Well, I offered to do stuff with the walkway. And now they got Jamie and Jeff. You know, they do all their promotions and their biggest stuff. Well, they're graphic designers, I guess. So they do all the brochures. I offered.
But you know, it's always nice to have another set of eyes or another vision or something else that's different.
Sherry, how have you been? Got some new stuff here, so it's not reruns. Everything, yeah.
Got Gunky Mouse? He looks very determined.
Yeah, she's bringing them all.
Jack has some trouble.
Might need a few more chairs, yes. There's also a room on the other side of the kitchen. More art. I don't know if any of these are not, but. Slapped it. Well, that's actually a redback. I can tell this in my thoughts. I was working for a company that manufactured redbacks. They wanted some advertisement for the redback, so I think let's do a dynamic image of a redback. You can't get more dynamic than that. So
It's nice to meet you, Louis.
No, because the guy who was the head of the department, he was the designer. So he was thinking like blueprints, he said arts are rats don't dead. So like, oh, come on.
I was speaking these clients. Yes, certain restrictions for very.
So it's like New York, that's nice to have a rope.
It's more of a burrow than a dump.
Yeah, I know, but it looks like a rope like around his, nose. You can see the rope.
That's it.
Yeah.
I know one.
No, so we wait for them all.
Well, I had to go. Typos on here. No, it's good to know. I don't have these simple slides. Do one of those, huh? Which I support.
What do you think?
There's nothing to do with that. Right, I understand, right?
Which is, it annoys people, but I think it's good to, I think people need to be here.
You gotta take one of the team. That's where we're going.
So that's a place out.
Some people.
Well, after all, you want some good.
Do you have a name?
No, that's my old promotion house.
Okay.
That's my business card.
Something exactly, something for
A lot.
No, just a
Hardcore, not
sales
sales.
conductor.
That's gonna be for a third eye or. I just don't, I would have to do a second eye. You know, that's what I said, I know. Where does it grow? I could use. My thing would be okay, that'd be awesome.
I appreciate everybody showing up.
This is awesome. Yeah.
I can talk a little bit about the gallery itself. We've got 19 members. We have a new show every 2 months. So this is the August-September show. It's all right, let it go. We'll be going on Zoom for a little bit. But so we'll have a new show in October.
Yeah, I know.
So and we try to support Hyde Park and local artists. We've got a lot of older members who are old art teachers, and some of them are really masters of their craft. So it's a good opportunity. we're a nonprofit, it's a financial struggle, but we are the only gallery in Hyde Park.
Really?
We're proud of that, we've been
That's
here.
surprising.
The only gallery around, really.
Well, there's a lot in Poughkeepsie.
Oh, yes.
Like, when we-
I'm here, Don. Oh, I can sit there. I didn't realize
there
there
was
was a chair there. I'm sorry.
There's a thing called the Art League, which is our brochure. It shows the galleries in Poughkeepsie. You can actually take a walking tour of the galleries that are open on weekends. And there's also shows where the murals are. There's a lot of murals in Poughkeepsie. But if you look at the area like Beacon, Kingston, Rhinebeck, there's a lot of galleries that are opening up. It's really blossoming. I think COVID has helped that a little bit, but not financially. There's been a couple closings, but at least there's a movement to support each
I did
other.
a walking tour in Houston. Like 42 different murals.
Hey, Carl, how you doing? This is Carl Rico. He's our sculptor.
Is that
We've
Carl?
met his wife Marilyn.
Hello.
Thanks for showing up. His sculptures are all those stone, and you can see in the art. I also decorated the room here. Those are all
Nice.
Carl Rico's. He's right down the road. He's got his yard full of sculptures. I'm sure he'd love to talk. If you could coax him to talk a little bit. If we need more chairs, I got a couple more chairs over there.
Barb's gonna need one.
She's actually doing the sales.
Yeah, she's gonna probably have to.
Oh.
Let me just.
Let me just say, yeah, what you
Sure.
I'm gonna save this one.
Oh, okay.
Street, walkway, some event.
I think he said that she's doing a sale or something.
Right now.
Yeah. So, that's all right.
So where's everybody from?
I'm Poughkeepsie.
You got a door prize? Yeah, you're 2 blocks away.
You're gonna go the longest distance here? Yeah.
You got a door prize for whoever traveled.
Free admission, right?
Oh, these are friends from the walkway. Raise your hand if you're from the walkway.
Hello.
We have several members. We've got 4 members. This is Marge back here. She's a friend of the family, so to speak. And I know Terry and his wife there are former. Well, Terry's a former coworker. So it's nice to make a connection. I appreciate the support.
Carl has welcome clouds.
What's up, sorry?
The walkway is open.
Oh, yeah. On the east side of the upper landing, there's that, that's, you did that, what, 5-6 years ago?
Let me give you this.
sorry, I didn't know, I'm sorry.
I'm gonna be right back.
Yesterday was the anniversary, Joe.
How can you mention that?
I'm sorry, forgive me.
No, unforgivable. Oh, it's unforgivable.
They can't be separated.
Yeah, we're joined at the hip.